doing backtracking practice. A group of students was playing What's My Rule? Miguel and Athena thought they knew what the rule was. Both students used K to represent the input and P to represent the output. Miguel's rule was P equals 14 times the quantity of K plus 7. Athena's rule was P equals 14 times K plus 7. Make a flow chart for each rule. Do not fill in the ovals. So let's go ahead and make this flow chart for both of them. The first one will be Miguel's. If you are following PEMDAS rules based on the parentheses, Miguel would add 7 first, then multiply by 14. Athena, she would multiply by 14 first, then add 7. Now, for each rule, use backtracking to find the input with the given output of 105. So let's put those in our last circle here for 105. Let's look at Miguel's rule. If the opposite of multiply by 14 would be divide by 14. Well, 105 divided by 14 would give me 7.5. And the opposite of add 7 would be to subtract 7. Well, that would leave me with 0.5 as the answer. So Miguel's answer would be 0.5. Now for Athena, the opposite of add 7 would be subtract 7. That would get me to 98. And then I would divide that by 14. Comes out right here. And I would get 7. So Athena's answer would be 7. Now, are these two rules equivalent? Why or why not? Well, no, they're not equivalent because in Miguel's rule, you had to do what was in parentheses first. And parentheses says I would add first. In Athena's rule, she doesn't have any parentheses, so all of it would fall under PEMDAS. What do I do first? Parentheses change that when you talk about PEMDAS. Now here's Gabrielle and Aaron are playing the game. Think of a number. Think of a number, triple it, subtract 6, multiply your results by 5, and what do you get? Well, first, Gabrielle must figure out Aaron's starting number. Draw a flow chart to represent this game. So the game says triple it, subtract 6. That means multiply by 3, subtract 6, then multiply the whole thing by 5. Now, we have to write an equation with this to get to the answer of 60. Well, my equation, if I use the variable n, would be 3 times n minus 6 times 5 equals 60. Now, in order to be able to multiply the whole thing by 5, like it says, I would have to have parentheses around the 3n minus 6. Therefore, that would all be multiplied by 5 to get to 60. Now, if we wanted to find the solution, we would backtrack it. The opposite of multiply by 5 would be divide by 5. 60 divided by 5 is 12. The opposite of subtract 6 would be add 6. I would get to 18. The opposite of times 3 would be divide by 3. I would get to 6. Checking your solution to see if that is correct. Let's put that back into our equation. Again, our equation is 3n minus 6 times 5. So if I did 3 times 6 minus 6, all in parentheses, multiply that by 5 to get to 60. Is that correct? Well, follow PEMDAS rules. Do what's in parentheses first. And I would have to multiply within that. That gives me 18 minus 6, still in parentheses, times 5. 18 minus 6 is 12 times 5. And yes, that does give me 60. So that would be correct. Here's another one. Here's Luke's. To solve this equation, here's his flow chart. He had times 2 plus 1, divide by 3, minus 1, all to get to 5. Is his flow chart correct? Did he do the right thing? Well, let's think about that. What does PEMDAS say we have to do? PEMDAS says I have to do parentheses first. So no, that is not what he did. He multiplied first. So if I had to change this to make it correct, I would take out that times 2, make that the plus 1, and then I would times by 2. The rest of it is correct. So if I'm going to solve, I'm going to backtrack it. Opposite of -1 is +1, which gets me to 6. The opposite of divide by 3 is times 3, which gets me to 18. The opposite of times 2 is divide by 2, which gets me to 9. And the opposite of +1 is -1, which gets me to 8. So my solution would be 8. And if I wanted to check this, I put 8 back in for my variable and see, does 2 times the quantity of 8 plus 1, all divided by 3, subtracting 1, really equal 5? Well, follow PEMDAS rules. Do what's in parentheses. So the top would give you 2 times 9 divided by 3 minus 1 equals 5, hopefully. Then 2 times 9 I would do, which is 18, divided by 3, subtracting 1 to get to 5. Well, then PEMDAS says divide. 18 divided by 3 is 6, minus 1. Yes, that does equal 5, so my answer checks out. Now we have Connor, Athena, and McGill. They each made a flow chart to represent this equation. 1 plus n times 3, all divided by 4, minus 11 equals 10. Look at Connor's flow chart. Well, Connor has to make sure he's following PEMDAS rules. He multiplied by 3, then divided by 4, then added 1, then subtracted 11. Would Connor be correct? Well, no, he would not be correct, because we would need to do everything in the numerator before we divided, because the quantity is divided by 4, all of that. So we would want to make sure that we added first, then divided. Now look at Athena's. Athena says it's +1 times 3 divided by 4, subtract 11. Again, looking at our rules of PEMDAS, no, she is not correct, because PEMDAS says I have to multiply before I would add. So PEMDAS is making that incorrect, because I want to be sure I multiply before I add. Now look at Miguel's. He says times 3 plus 1 divided by 4, subtract 11 to get to 10. Miguel would be correct. He followed all the rules of PEMDAS and order of operations in order to get to a solution. Now, in exercise 4 and 5 below, we're going to draw flowcharts to represent these equations. We're going to solve them, and then we're going to check them. So, in 4, the first thing we have the variable n. The first thing I do to it is subtract 13. Then, what do I do next? I divide all of that by 2. Then, I add 6 to get to the answer 15. Now I want to backtrack it. The opposite of +6 is -6, which gets me to 9. The opposite of divide by 2 is times 2, which gets me to 18. And the opposite of -13 is +13, which gets me to 31. Now I want to be sure to check this. So let's go ahead and put this back into my equations. I'll substitute in 31 for the n, -13 divided by 2 plus 6 has to equal 15. Is that correct? Well, first I would take 31 and divide 13 from it to get to 18. Still dividing by 2 plus 6. What does that equal? Well, 18 divided by 2 is 9 plus 6. Yes, that does equal 15. That one checks out. Now let's go back up to 5. I'm going to erase to make some space. Make sure you have it all written in your notes before you move forward. Now, this next equation that we have says that I have 7 times the quantity of n plus 4 divided by 7 plus 1 to get to 84. So let's start my flow charts here. First thing I do to that variable is I'm going to add 4 to it. Then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to divide it by 7. Then I'm going to add 1. Then I'm going to multiply it by 7 to get to the answer of 84. So let's backtrack this out. Now, the first thing I want to do with this is divide by 7. So if I take 84 and divide it by 7, I need to determine what is that? Well, that's 12. Then the opposite of +1, oops, I should have wrote that down here for you. is subtract 1. That gets me to 11. The opposite of divide by 7 is times 7, which gets me to 77. And the opposite of subtract 4 is minus 4, which gets me to 73. Now, I want to be sure that put that in to check it. So let's go ahead and put that back into our problem and check out our answer. So if I put 73 in for n, I'm going to have 73 plus 4 divided by 7 plus 1, all in parentheses, times 7 equal to 84. Well, let's follow PEMDAS rules here. First thing I want to do is add that 73 and 4 to get to 77 divided by 7 plus 1. All times 7 equals 84. Now 77 divided by 7 is 11 plus 1, still in the parentheses because I haven't finished. This gives me 7 times 12. If I multiply that out, I see that, yes, that does equal 84. It checks out, correct. Now we have a few more problems to do. I'll do the first one with you, and then I want you to do the next 3 on your own and come back and check your answers to see what your answers would be. So the first one for number 6, let's draw our circles. Variable is z. What's the first thing we do to it? We multiply by 7. Then what do I do to it? I add 2. Then what do? I divide by 15, all to get to the answer of 2. Opposite of divide by 15 is add 15. Got a circle in there. Sorry about that. 2 times 15 gives me 30. Opposite of add 2 is subtract 2 to get to 28. The opposite of multiply by 7 is divide by 7. That gets me to 4. Therefore, my solution is 4. Make sure we check it. Let's put 4 into the problem. The problem is 7 times 4 plus 2, all divided by 15 to equal 2. Follow PEMDAS rules. 7 times 4 is 28, plus 2 divided by 15 equals 28 plus 2 is 30 divided by 15. Yes, that does equal 2. It checks out and correct. Go ahead and try the next 3 on your own. I will tell you that number 7, you're going to get a repeating decimal, and that is just fine. You can do so. Come back in a moment and check your work. All right, let's see where we're at. Let's go ahead and do number 7 together. Here we go, making our circles to see what we're going to get. First one I do to the variable is I times it by 12. Then I have to add 8 to it. Then I'm going to have to multiply it by 100, all to get to 2,100. Well, the opposite of multiply by 100 is to divide it by 100. That gets me to 21. The opposite, oops, 21, sorry. The opposite of add 8 is subtract 8. When I subtract 8 from that problem, I get down to 13. The opposite of times 12 is dividing by 12. Now in this case, I'm going to get 1.083 repeating. 1.083 repeating. Go ahead and check your answer, see if you're correct. Let's look at number 8. Number 8 now. Remember, following the rules. What do we do to that variable first? That's what we want to decide. So let's go ahead and take a look at it and see what would we do first. Get these marks out of my way. Don't know what happened here, but we're going to get rid of it. First thing I do to this is I am going to subtract the 36. Then what did I do? I divided by 6. Then what did I do? I added the 16, all to get to 83. Now, undo that. The opposite of add 16 is subtract 16. 83 subtract 16 is 67. The opposite of divide by 6 is to multiply by 6. That gets me to 402. The opposite of subtract 36 is add 36. And that is going to get me to 438. Go ahead and check that answer and see if it's correct. Get rid of this here so we can go ahead and get to the rest of it. All right, last one, number 9. Drawing my circle. First thing I do to that variable is I'm dividing it by 2. Next thing I'm doing to that variable is I'm subtracting 3. Next thing I'm doing is I'm multiplying by 4. Next thing I'm doing is I'm adding 1, all to get to 97. Now let's undo that. Opposite of divide by 1 is, or plus 1, I'm sorry, is minus 1, which gives me 96. The opposite of times 4 would be divide by 4, which gives me 24. The opposite of subtract 3 would be add 3, which gives me 27. And the opposite of divide by 2 would be times 2, which gives me 254. Go ahead and check your answers and see if you're correct.